The argument had started with something minor, but it grew until both you and Jungkook were simmering in frustration. You hadn't meant to misplace his important document, but after an already long day, his sharp tone made you feel small. When he raised his voice, frustration and hurt mixed, and you found yourself speaking louder, too. "Do you ever take anything seriously?" he muttered, shaking his head as he looked away. "Of course I do. Just because I made a mistake doesn't mean I don't care." You felt your voice tremble, frustration and hurt mixing. He scoffed, looking down. "It's always just a mistake with you, isn't it?" That line stung. It made you feel like every effort you put into being with him went unnoticed. He crossed his arms, his jaw set, avoiding your gaze. "Fine," you muttered, feeling a wave of hurt wash over you. "If that's what you think, maybe I should just leave you alone for a while." But as the words left your mouth, you already regretted them. Jungkook just nodded, still cold. "Maybe you should." You turned away, fighting tears, and tried to sleep that night, but the bed felt lonely. Jungkook kept his distance, his back turned. Every time you shifted, hoping he'd roll over or reach out, he remained still. YN thought. "Why are you crying now, YN? You really thought he was just joking when he said that he really liked kids and he want them and you just pushed him away saying that he just want to do that with you. Now you are facing the outcome." Finally, after hours of tossing and turning, you gave up, lying on your back and staring at the ceiling. The next morning, you found him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, looking as if nothing happened. Determined to break the silence, you approached him. "Jungkook," you started gently. He barely glanced at you, his face still unreadable. "Are we really going to keep ignoring each other over this?" He sighed, putting down his phone, though his expression stayed firm. "I don't know, YN. It's hard to move on when I feel like you don't take this seriously." A knot formed in your stomach. "I do take it seriously. It's just, I make mistakes, and I hate that I disappoint you." Jungkook looked away, and his silence hurt more than any words. He wouldn't even look at you. That quiet coldness was worse than an argument, it was distance, an emotional wall you didn't know how to break. That evening, you couldn't take it anymore. Watching him avoid you all day was agony, and the distance felt insurmountable. You found him sitting on the couch, scrolling aimlessly. You took a deep breath and walked over, standing in front of him until he looked up. You stood there, right in front of Jungkook, letting the silence hang between you both. Taking a deep breath, you looked down, mustering up the courage. "Jungkook, I'm sorry, really sorry. I can't stand this silence between us anymore." He looked up at you, his face still unreadable. "I don't know, YN. Maybe it's just better if I don't expect too much." His words were calm but hit you harder than if he had yelled. You sat down beside him, close enough that your shoulders brushed, and reached for his hand. "I know I messed up, but I don't want to go to sleep angry, or have you go to bed thinking that I don't care. I love you, Jungkook, and if I could take it back, I would." Your voice softened, almost a whisper. He exhaled, and although he didn't pull away, he didn't hold your hand back either. "YN, sometimes I just feel like you don't understand how important these things are to me. I needed that document. You know how much I had writing on it." You felt a twinge of guilt but also warmth, realizing he was opening up, sharing his frustration rather than hiding behind the cold wall he'd built. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much pressure you were under. But I just want you to know, you're not alone in this. I'm here, and I'll try harder." You squeezed his hand, hoping he'd feel your sincerity. After a moment, he finally looked at you, his eyes softening just slightly. "You really drive me crazy sometimes, you know that." His voice was a mixture of exasperation and something softer, something more vulnerable. You leaned in, closer to him, a slight smirk on your lips. "I know, but I also know that you can't stay mad at me forever." Slowly, you pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, lingering just enough to let him know how much you missed him. He tried to keep up his frown, but you saw his lips twitch as if holding back a smile. You leaned in again, brushing another soft kiss on his other cheek, then his jawline, as his hand slowly came up to rest on your waist. "YN, he said, his voice softer, more tired than angry now. You murmured against his skin, feeling him relax. "Stop that," he said, but you could tell he didn't really mean it. He was starting to melt, to let go of the anger. His hand slid up, cradling the back of your head as you continued pressing soft, gentle kisses along his cheek, his jaw, and finally on his lips. And with that, whatever anger was left seemed to fade. His arms wrapped around you, pulling you close until there was no space left between you. You stayed there, cuddled close to him, wrapped in his warmth, feeling safe and at home. Jungkook's arms wrapped around you tightly as he pulled you close, his hands softly tracing patterns along your back. He buried his face in your neck, breathing in your scent as if grounding himself. The room felt warmer, softer now, with the tension finally melting away between you. After a moment, he pulled back just enough to look at you, his gaze filled with a tenderness that made your heart skip a beat. You know, you're infuriating sometimes, he said, though a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. You laughed softly, brushing a strand of his hair back from his forehead. I know, but I think that's why you love me. You were half teasing, but the truth hung in the air between you. He raised an eyebrow, his eyes softening even more. Maybe you're right, he murmured, and with that, he leaned in, capturing your lips in a kiss that was soft, slow, and full of all the feelings left unsaid. You melted into him, feeling his warmth, his steady heartbeat against you. His hands traveled to your waist, holding you close as he deepened the kiss, making you feel like the only person in the world. As you finally broke apart, you both stayed close, your foreheads touching. Promise me you'll be a little more careful next time, he whispered, his voice low but gentle. You nodded, smiling as you stroked his cheek. Promise. And I promise to be here, by your side, no matter what. A comfortable silence filled the room as he held you close, his hand gently rubbing your back. You both stayed there, tangled up in each other, the world outside fading away, knowing that as long as you had each other, you'd be able to face anything. The evening grew quiet as you and Jungkook settled into the dimly lit room, the earlier tension between you dissolving into something softer, warmer. But his mischievous side started to show again as he smirked, wrapping his arm more snugly around you. You know, you were pretty bold back there, he murmured, his breath tickling your ear. Trying to bribe me with kisses, who knew you'd go to such lengths? His teasing tone made your cheeks flush. You playfully nudged him. Oh, please, don't act like you didn't love it. You tried to keep a straight face, but you couldn't help the little laugh that escaped. He chuckled, his fingers tracing a lazy pattern up your arm, sending a shiver through you. Well, I won't deny it was effective, he admitted, leaning closer, his lips brushing just beside your jaw, teasingly close. But now I think you owe me more, you know, for making me sulk all day. You raised an eyebrow, pretending to act unimpressed. And what exactly do I owe you, Mr. Jaeon? Oh, I don't know, he whispered, his fingers lightly trailing down your arm. Maybe a few more of those kisses. For, let's say, my wounded pride. You rolled your eyes, unable to hold back your smile. Your wounded pride, you couldn't help but laugh. Is that right? I didn't know the great Jungkook was so sensitive. Only when it comes to you, he said softly, his gaze turning serious for just a moment. But then, the playful glint was back in his eyes. Now come on, pay up. He tilted his head, tapping his cheek as if demanding his payment, with mock seriousness. You leaned in, barely brushing your lips against his cheek. Just as you started to pull away, he turned his head suddenly, catching your lips with his in a lingering, tender kiss that seemed to melt away any remaining tension. Breaking apart, you couldn't help but tease him. There, happy, he shrugged, pretending to think. Almost, but I think it might take a few more before I'm truly satisfied. His playful grin made you laugh, and you gave in, leaning in for another kiss, knowing this was a game you'd happily lose to him every time.